Most camps, right, they were built by and for people without disabilities, right? People who are neurotypical. They were not built for people who are neurodivergent or who have disabilities. So we need to constantly disrupt and look and change and make suggestions.
The goal of every camp counselor is to hold up a mirror and show kids why they're awesome.
This is First Class Counselors, another innovative podcast brought to you by Camp Hacker. First Class Counselors is dedicated to young and up-and-coming camp mavericks. By equipping and empowering our on-the-ground staff, camp directors can rest easy knowing that our campers are having the true life-changing experience that parents expect. Find our show notes and our blog for camp leaders and professionals at camphacker.tv.
AM Skyer is a leading insurance and strategic partner for many of the finest camps in America. AM Skyer partners with camps to provide public relations, legal, medical, behavioral support, and more. Experience the AM Skyer difference. Learn more at amskyer.com.
Welcome to First Class Counselors, where we give camp counselors insider tips and advice on how to make a camper summer the best it can be.
And whether you are brand new to the camp world or you've sat around the campfire a couple of times, you know that self-improvement and growth mindset is built into the DNA of every great staff member or every great first-class counselor.
My name is Oliver Gregan. Pronouns are he, him. I'm the Director of Camping Services at YMCA Camp Westwood with the Pawtucket YMCA in Coventry, Rhode Island. We are a rebuilding day camp that plans to introduce overnight camp this year.
And my name is Matt Wilford. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the executive producer of podcasting and a consultant with Go Camp Pro.
And today's topic, we are so lucky to not be alone in this. I want to introduce our co-host of the day, Lisa Drennan. She's the founder of Merge Consulting. Lisa has had a long career working with people with intellectual and developmental needs. She started with the New England Village in Pembroke, Mass. So she's a fellow New Englander. She's also a fellow YMCA leader working for the South Shore YMCA. And she has served on the Y of the USA's Diverse Abilities Working Group. So everyone please say hi to Lisa for us.
Perfect. Everybody.
Lisa, we are so glad to have you here. We've been talking a lot on this season of First Class Counselor, specifically about working, with campers and supporting them. Our last episode was talking about how to help with when campers use inappropriate language. So there's been a little bit of a behavior and a working with campers spin to this season. And we were talking about how important it was to talk about inclusion and to really look at, before we even get to behavior, what is the overall philosophy when it comes to welcoming and supporting all campers at camp. So we're so grateful to have you here. And I was just wondering, Lisa, if you could tell us a little bit about your experience. How did you get into the camp world and what inspired you to be such a pro on inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. So, before camp, I worked 30 years in the space of helping folks with intellectual developmental disabilities, but I was a rec director. So I ran programs. Very much like a YMCA or camp. It was called the Solar Wellness Center. I oversaw that. And I really got to learn how do you teach to people who might think differently, learn differently, participate differently with the variety of disabilities, from physical to developmental, autism, Down syndrome, somebody who is blind, deaf. And it was really part of my foundation to learn that you need to teach differently to different people, look at people as individuals. So then I brought that all together. And when I went to the YMCA, one of my first initiatives, I know when I had my interview and then they were like, yep, you're on board. This year, we're going to start all-inclusive camps. And I was like, you mean next year, right? I need to learn about this first. And they're like, no, in a couple months, we're going to have fully inclusive camps. And that was their goal. And jumped right into the fire and just learned about camp, both day and residential, through the South Shore YMCA. And that's where my heart kind of landed. I'm in the right space, through the camps and everything else that the YMCA offered, because I could see kiddos who the year previously were not allowed in or were kicked out or were not successful in other camps. I could see them be successful. And I just knew I was sharing all my 30 years of experience with this YMCA and saying, all right, let's try this, let's do this, let's do that. And it just sparked something in me that this is what our world needs. And I've made a decision, after 4 or 5 years there, that I wanted to take this on the road, and I wanted to help other camps and other YMCAs and other rec programs to be more inclusive in their practices. And the camp space is just, it speaks to me because you're my peeps. And I love working in this field. So yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking.
I think it's awesome that you've had this career where like you came from outside of camp with these special skills and then have been able to introduce them into camps. As you've gone through this, what are some things that you've seen that makes a counselor with strong inclusion skills, those that who have, learned and developed them, make them strong and offer something different to their campers that maybe a counselor who hasn't developed those skills?
That's a great question. And I think, Oliver, what you're pointing out is that people come to the table with different experiences. Maybe they have personal experience themselves, identifying as having a disability, a sibling, or have worked in the field long enough that they have, indirectly or directly worked with kiddos with disabilities, but also highlighting that even if you come to the table with no experience, the idea of inclusion, in my mind, is that no matter where you enter, it's okay, right? So whatever, I always do this quiz with people when I do a training. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you feel is your comfort level working with kids with disabilities? And people are ones and people are tens and everything in between. But my point is, no matter where you're entering, it's about creating a culture. And here's all I ask of people. Here's what the successful people, whether you started as a 2 or started as a 9, they came with an open mind and an open heart. And if you come to the table with those two qualities, the rest, and I often say 85% of it is that open mind and open heart. That other 15%, I can teach you that. Like that's easy to do. We don't need to come to the table with, letters behind our names. We have this experience or background. We don't, and I often think about this. If I'm, a parent and I'm handed my baby, I just have a baby, and this child has Down syndrome. I may have zero experience, but guess what? You figure it out, or that dad who's, suddenly raising their teenager on their own, and the teenager's struggling, and then they get a diagnosis of autism or ADHD. And then the dad's like, I don't know how to work with it. But you know what? The dad figures it out.
Mm.
So I really think that it does not take this specialty. Now, if you're a lucky enough camp and you have someone who is a specialist or who's worked in this field, that's awesome, but it's not necessary. If you feel like, I don't have experience, I can't do this, you can do it. If you have somebody in
Mm.
your team that has more experience, they should help teach everybody else. So
Mhm.
there you go, right? That goes back to that open heart, open mind, not necessarily big letters behind your name. It just, are you willing to learn? And we can do it together.
I think that's so important too, to like start this conversation about that inclusion is for everyone, from especially from like the counselor or the practitioner side, is that you don't have to have a specific set of expertise. And I think down the road in first class counselors, we could do specific episodes on like how to support campers on the autism spectrum, how to support campers with Down syndrome, with different physical needs. Like we could go into those specifics, but I think, Lisa, we're excited today to talk about those like big picture inclusion practices, because right, there's this idea behind how do we create inclusive environments, is that we can do things that will support everybody, that will support everyone to have a more inclusive experience. Some people know that as universal design, if you're talking specifically, but what we're going to talk about today are some of the broad skills, broad but specific skills, specific things that counselors can do to prepare for the summer, and what they can do in the summer to create a more generally inclusive space that we know will support even more campers than they would have had they not had these skills. So I'm just so grateful for the perspective and philosophies you'll bring to this conversation.
Oh, I love it. And I love that idea, universal design, because that's so key. And I think it does speak again back to the whether you were a 1 on that list or you were the 10, right? That universal design is what we're looking for, because the number one principle of inclusion is it takes organizational commitment. So anybody listening to this right now, you have a role in inclusion. And so does every one of your peers, right? So I use this kind of approach or philosophy. I call it in all, for all, by all. in all settings in your camp, right? So for whether you have day camp, residential camp, all of it, maybe you do year-round programming, right? We use inclusive practices for, of course, our campers, also for any volunteers, CITs.
Mm.
But here's a piece too. You also use inclusive practices for your staff team because there's a huge chance 1 in 4 people will have a disability at some point in their lives, right? So 70% of them are not a parent, so we might not see, but they may have something that they're working on, they're struggling with, they're living with, that makes it a challenge for their job, and we would want to help support them too, right? So same philosophy. So that's in all. For all means, and you hit this, Matt, we use inclusive practices for everybody. We don't segregate kids or say, like, all those kids with autism, come on over here because we're going to go over the visual schedule. We wouldn't do that. Because you know what? Inclusion strategies benefit everybody, not just kids with a diagnosis. And then so that's in all, for all, and by all means that every single one of your staff should be trained. If you have, I mentioned before, if you have that specialist or, a TR or a therapeutic rec person or somebody who has a special education background, awesome. But they don't do inclusion. They should help teach inclusion. Everybody does inclusion, right? So there's a difference. We don't lean on one person to solve all of our issues. Then we're gonna set ourselves up for failure, because then every other staff's gonna go, well, I don't have to work with these kids. Let's send them over to that person.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
isn't how it works, right? It's
That's
in
right.
all, for all, by all. So
The
bingo, you hit it.
the camp director side of me is like firing at all cylinders of trying to think about how this all envelops into a camp and how everybody is involved in it, right? So it can't just be one person that everyone puts the weight on to be like, oh, you're the inclusion specialist, we hired you to do this. No, 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 no. Like, that person is there maybe to help facilitate those things, teach them and train staff to have the equipment.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at your entire staff team, you, the listener here as a counselor, it is just as important for you to be a contributing factor to making those people feel like
And even
they're
more
like
important,
part.
especially for our boots on the ground counselors over there doing it, they need to have the tools. They need to have the confidence. And then often, all of a sudden, it shifts from being a program or a person to being a culture change. So see that difference? Like, oh, we do inclusion. We have this person. We've hired them. They take care of that. That's a program. That's a person. But when we say our whole entire camp is committed to this, then it's culture change. And that's what we're looking for.
That's a really beautiful thing and way to look at it, is that everyone's a part of that culture of including everyone who comes to camp,
Yeah.
and kind of taking a little bit of pride in it. If it's part of your organization, I think
100%.
it's really important. So let's talk a little bit about, before you get even introduced to that culture, if you're a counselor who's coming from the outside, coming into a camp for the first time, and you want to bring some inclusive practices with you, what are some things that you're starting to do prior to coming to the camp, prior to being that camp counselor, that will make you ready to be that inclusive counselor?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to start with something, it's a mindset shift. So not something physically you're doing, but a mindset shift. Know that inclusion, where actually I have a training, it's called Belonging is the New Inclusion. Inclusion is good, but it's not enough. And especially in camps, we have this, you as this individual person have this incredible power to help change the life of a kiddo who has diverse abilities or, different disabilities, is neurodivergent, thinking about belonging. So we really want to make sure we're shifting our minds and opening it up to thinking about, you're seeing every single camper as somebody that you want to help them to belong. Right. So it's not just access. Sure, you're welcome to our camp. It's not just inclusion. Sure, you can be in the camp groups with everybody else. Those are great. That's the path. But it's the what we want at the end, the end result or the outcome is belonging. So put that in your mindset. How can you, and here's a great example, make a friend. Right. So I often start most of my presentations with the story of Kyle, how he made a friend. He's a kid kicked out of 3 camps, and he came to our camp and had a successful summer, made a friend, got invited to a birthday party. That's what we want to keep in our mind. Who are your Kyles in your camp, and how can you help them to be successful? So that's just it. You have that mindset, and then there's simple things that you could do. Make sure we're up to date on language, right? What is preferred language? person first language, certain words that we don't use anymore. And if anybody want you to, shoot me an email and I'll send you my list, right? I kind of look at this all the time, constantly changing those. So you have to stay on top of it, right? And it all has to do with people's preference of what their language is. So, person first language, we would say the individual with Down syndrome, not the Down syndrome kid or the, paraplegic guy, right? We wouldn't say that person has paraplegia. So yeah, just thinking about that. And you mentioned earlier, Matt, universal design. So think about your space, right? If you're in charge of a certain space, start thinking now, you know what? Could we have a little bit of a sensory space? How's that going to work? Maybe we need to set that up ahead of time, a quieter space, a calming space. Maybe it has a sensory kit and we want to get all the specifics. How's it going to be used? When's it going to be used? How do we make sure they're just not toys that everybody wants to play with? How do we use those properly? Maybe you even think about, we want to train all our staff to make sure we know that. So that could be your thing. But before you even enter your first day of camp, like, hello, Monday morning, right? I want you to make this another mindset shift. And instead of thinking about learning about, I want to know their disability, their diagnosis, their deficit, their challenging behaviors, right? Make that mindset. I want to know their strengths. I want to know every one of my camper strengths. So when you come to the table thinking that way, now you're going to focus on what makes them shine. What do they love? What are they great at? And there's a quick thing you can suggest or ask yourself is during the intake process, or if you're learning about your campers, ask that first question should be what makes them shine, not list all your disabilities, deficits. And I would not, if somebody introduced a camper to you, and I might say, Oliver, in your group this week, you're going to have Miguel, and he has blank, blank, and blank. Let's not talk about people in that way instead, or not introduce, you're going to have Miguel and just wait till you meet him. He's an incredible musician, right? So start with the strengths. And if people start with deficits, reframe and say, can you tell me a little bit, more about what do they like? Get to the areas of support needs after, but paint a picture that shows strengths, right? So when you focus on strengths, what you're doing is now you're raising up their capacity to be seen as the musician or the artist or the really good swimmer or the very kind person or the good organizer. And then what happens when we go back to belonging, when you recognize somebody in that way, what happens? It's called social role valorization. Their peers are more likely to identify with them and want to get to know them, rather than kind of giving this word of like, oh, it's a behavior kid, or they're really challenging, or they have this, or they have, don't need to start there. So that if you're prepping, think about those things to help you prep. And, my final thing for what can you do? You're not alone in this. So make connections with your team. Who's on your team to help you learn that? If you're that one or two and you're, a little nervous about camp this year, I know I might have some kids who are challenging, find your 8 or 9. Find your 8 or 9 in your team and, just reach out and introduce yourself and say, like, I don't have a lot of experience, but I notice that you do. And is it okay if I come to you if I have any questions? Now you're set up to have, you got the right mindset, you've got some things in place and some strategies in place to move forward.
I do love that concept of that positivity of shining the strength of a person, whether you are working in a community or a camp with campers who do have special needs, versus even if it's, any of your campers who come into your cabin. Like, how are you introducing that camper to the rest of the cabin? It's like, hey, this is Kyle, right? And Kyle was amazing last year keeping the cabin clean. Or, man, you've got to see how great Steph is at soccer. She was an all-star last year. I'm sure she can teach us a few tricks because you probably learned something, right? That
Yeah.
counselor who is already hyping their campers from
Yeah.
the moment they're coming into the cabin to, the cabin chats and everything. That counselor is somebody who has that positivity that just gets reflected into all of the campers in their cabin. So I love that point, and it's
Yeah.
something that I
Yeah.
just wanted to emphasize for counselors who are working with any kids this summer,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
be that
Yeah.
right counselor.
And it's a good practice for life, to look at people's strengths, not deficits. Identify people by their strengths, not what challenges they have. They can't do this. Focus on what they can do. So yeah, glad you recognize that.
For over 100 years, summer camp has been an integral part of the AM Skyer world. Today, AM Skyer is a strategic partner for summer camps across the country, building personal relationships and providing valuable resources to their clients and friends. Every day, AM Skyer is proud to support camps and help make them safer. AM Skyer was founded by Abe Skyer in 1920 and is now in the third generation of Skyer family leadership. Henry, Jeffrey, Amy, and the experienced AM Skyer staff eat, sleep, and breathe summer camps, in addition to fostering partnerships with camps that last for decades. Give AM Skyer the opportunity to find solutions for your most challenging insurance needs. They go above and beyond. Learn more at amskyer.com. Lisa, I'm curious if there are any other, like, if a counselor is super invested in, beefing up their language or some of these specific skills that you talked about, whether they're the universal design or, some specific free education resources out there. Do you have any that we can pop these in the show notes too, but I'm wondering if you had any off the top of your head that you were like, oh, these are great resources that folks in their spare time can check out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, Matt, I'm happy to, I have a few summary handouts. One's on Words Matter. I'll throw that in the notes for you. Folks can take a look at that. I have a couple other ones too, some tips, I think I can share gets into real specifics on here are the things you can do to get ready for camp. So
Amazing.
Happy to do that. And I do think, I'll think of a couple other organizations that they can point to learn a little bit more. But also, anybody within your own, no matter where you live or come from, there are disability support organizations, right? So near me, there's the ARC and there's other, Mass Down Syndrome Congress, right? So I would point to learning to the people who know, and they're hopefully going to have the more accurate information. Also universities that are committed. Again, I'm from Boston. There are just a ton of, Institute for Community Inclusion, right? There's huge sources of information, accurate information. So yeah, absolutely. I'll get you a couple of those as well.
And I think for counselors listening to this, ask your camp too, right? If they have inclusion, I don't want to say inclusion programs because again, we're talking about every camper and belonging, but what resources do your camps use? So there was an organization in Canada at one point called Reach for the Rainbow. They don't exist any longer, but they were organizations that were connected to the camp space as well and had people like Lisa on their team that could offer some resources to you. So yeah, make sure you check the show notes and there'll be some ways that you can beef up your knowledge before you even get to camp.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what, if I could just bring up one point, when we think about connecting to disability support agencies, right? I always want to just put this little, just kind of a little check in place here. Often, unfortunately, because of how it's been set up, right? Folks have been historically segregated and taken care of by these organizations. Sometimes they might even struggle with what authentic inclusion is because they're so used to when people come to them, they run their own programs or they send them to Special Olympics or other programs like that sometimes they struggle. So keep that in mind because they might come in and you might be more advanced in inclusion than they are. Does that make sense? Because
Totally.
that's what I find when I work on both sides of that fence, sport, rec, camps, things over here. Agencies that support folks with disabilities. And sometimes they're even stuck and not really realizing because maybe their general community hasn't been very inclusive. So they default to specialized, adaptive, segregated programs. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's super smart. But I think going back to the kind of tenet of starting with strengths and also just remembering why we do what we do. We give kids the ability to come to camp and be celebrated for who they are and to find their best strengths. We talk about on this podcast all the time that the goal of every camp counselor is to hold up a mirror and show kids why they're awesome. Right. And that applies to every camper. That is the job of every kid that comes to camp and every counselor to do that. So yeah, I want to, as we move to what does this look like in practice during the summer? I want to kind of ground ourselves in that our goal is to help people feel celebrated, period, full stop. And that whether you have specific skills or not, it's your and your camp's job to help beef up those skills. But if we start from the foundation of you're great, and let's help you feel super welcome and celebrated here, then we're off to a good start.
I love that. I think that's key. I love
And,
that. Putting that mirror in everybody has a chance to shine, right? That's what we want.
and Lisa, you kind of bring up something too that I want to ask a very quick question about. But
Mhm.
we've talked a lot about that inclusiveness of coming to a camp that has a more of a general populace, right? Like of kind of everyone coming together. You talked about there are these specific programs out there that are for specific demographics of kids. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about why those are important? So like a counselor who might be looking to specifically work either at a camp that is trying to include everybody versus a camp that is trying to make sure everybody of this same demographic feels part of this world.
Oh, so important. Maybe our medical specific camps, things like that, right? So I had the pleasure of working with the American Diabetes Association last year for preparing them for summer, and really got to hone in on the importance, right? So I have something called models of participation. So it's, specialized, adaptive, integrated, full inclusion. And we always want to have more spaces of full inclusion. However, I recognize that having a specialized space like a camp just for kids who have type 1 diabetes, right? Or even, just a camp that is specific for any population, that there are benefits to that, right? That might be the space where somebody can enter the camp world and feel comfortable, right? Maybe they're afraid to, like, oh, I don't know what other camps know about my, diabetes or whatever medical issue, right? Would they know how to take care of me? That could be their fear or the family's fear. So maybe having that specialized experience also gives that camper, like, oh, I can do this and I love this, but I also might want to go to the camp with my neighbors and my friends that's, local, that we all go to. So choice, the point is choice. Should always be choice to how they participate. So there is value in having that specialized setting. And I think that's important because some kids need to feel that, like, that everybody else gets them there. And then hopefully they gain this, kind of strength that I can also go, I really like camp and I want to go to that soccer camp, right? And I really want to try that out. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to go to a YMCA or an overnight camp, whatever the camp is. So yeah, important to have choice on how they participate. That's why we need to open up more of our camps to being inclusive to everybody and, helping somebody to progress toward full inclusion by their choice.
I think I always think it's so fantastic that you can have a place that is designed for you in mind, but then also be welcomed to a place that's designed for everyone to be a part of. It
That's it.
comes from a lot of great camp professionals out there who have talked about that and a part of our community. But as we go on, let's kind of move into that summer. Now our counselors are here. They're on camp. We've given them the training and the preparation to be a part of making our camp inclusive as possible. But the kids have arrived, and that the imagination of what summer camp is going to look like looks a lot different with the unpredictability that we have with children being on site. So let's start with kind of the global, right? You're a counselor on camp. What are some things that you're daily thinking about or walking through to making sure that you are an inclusive counselor and that you are trying to make sure that these campers have that sense of belonging that we've been talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the belonging and everything is in place, and I'll end with a couple of tips about heading towards belonging, but I want to start with strategies that everybody should be utilizing. So as I say this, I want you to think about, you're listening here and going, wait, do we do that yet? Or should we be doing it better? Or maybe we need to be more consistent, right? Number one, use visual schedules, right? So camps are, you see it, all color coded schedules are there, but review them daily with everybody, right? So that your whole group is getting a chance. It's a great chance for interactions. And it's also allowing those kiddos who might be nervous, have never been to camp, what's going on? I want to go home, right? It helps them to kind of understand what's going to happen in the day. So it's having a list. You can use icons, you can use pictures, you can have like little things with magnets on it and take the group every morning. And if I told you that if you took the less than 2 minutes to do that and the less than 2 minutes to do the next one, which is called expectation list, that your day would, and your week and your summer would be so much more successful. I'm sure you'd do it, right? If you give me that 4 minutes, I'm sure everybody would do it. You review the schedule and then you go into the expectations. So expectations, so you notice I didn't say the word rules because in inclusion, we want to kind of stay away from rules because think about it. Rules meant to be broken, you break it, you're bad. Expectations teach us what we need for our campers to do in camp to be successful. So, and a lot of kiddos, maybe they haven't been to camp, or maybe they don't know the expectations here at this day, at this place and space. So you review the expectations. So again, you want to have visual and verbal review of that. And you might have icons, pictures. You want to keep it age appropriate, both of these, right? And they're listed. So it might say, oh, at camp, we listen to instructors, hands and feet to ourselves. We respect the environment in our buildings, right? Whatever it is that's important at your camp, always frame them in the positive, not a list of don't do this, 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 or this, or you're bad, right? Because then if you point out what you want somebody to do, now they're going to focus on that, and you're going to help them teach what that means in any setting. So if you start with those two, right, just start your day with that. Figure out if you physically don't have the, schedule board or a expectation list, reach out and I'll help you, teach you how to design one of those. But use them for every age, every day, right? And sometimes twice a day.
Do you have advice maybe for that counselor who has those expectations, but they're working with someone who has a disability? So there might be a little bit more of a hill to go up. So how does that counselor maybe practice patience with going through, like, I've talked to my camper about 15 times about language, but he keeps saying things he's not supposed to say, right?
Yeah.
How does that counselor get to work through that?
That's great. So we start with you review for the whole group. So that's done, right? So we understand that. But you also might make a copy of this. This might take us going back, showing the clock back a little bit. You might make a copy of this ahead of time. And if you're, again, going back a little bit, you've understood that this new camper coming in maybe struggles with the rules and has had some challenging behaviors. That's one that you might want to, or work with your staff or whoever, it's appropriate to do. Reach out to the family ahead of time and send a copy ahead of time. And now you're building a good relationship with the family, right? So now you're saying to the family, these are the expectations at camp. It'd be really helpful. Maybe the week before you go over them every morning and kind of start getting them used to hearing that. We listen to instructors. We stay with the group. We keep hands and feet to ourselves, whatever that is, right? We use kind words, right? So if kind words is the one that a kiddo is struggling with, if you send it ahead of time, you're working together, everybody else is hearing this. So instead of stop swearing, you keep swearing, you're going to get in trouble. We're going to try to be preventative and teach what, using nice words or kind language is. And then when that kiddo struggles, we pull the group back together. We don't say, you're wrong, you swore, you're going to get in trouble. Pull the group back together. And so let's say it's Oliver who's struggling with, using bad words. I would review all the expectations with all the kids. But when I get to the one that says use kind words or, positive language, then I'm going to point to Oliver and say, Oliver, can you read this one for me? Okay. All right. So now I'm addressing it without making him the bad kid. I'm trying to teach him, right? And then that these are the expectations of camp. Then you need to wait. And you need to wait. And when Oliver does one good thing, right? He says something great. Maybe he compliments someone. They did the backstroke, at swim today. Then you make sure you point that out. And now you're focusing on, again, strengths, positive, the way that you want somebody to participate, because once you go down that road of, here's the behavior, kid. They do one thing wrong. Point it out. They do another thing wrong. Point it out again. Point it out again. You're not changing anything, right? So you want to figure out, kind of what's going on there and then help them to know up front. And you address it without tone. You're addressing it without like disapproval or pointing out that this is the bad kid, because they're going to fulfill that role. Right. So that's kind of the way that, inclusive strategies work. It helps to teach everybody right up front. Got to make sure you're giving them the kudos when they do something that is positive in that way. Say it out loud, give them a high five. And often when somebody does something wrong, they get the little bit of the, I'm going to tell you, if you keep doing that, I'm going to call your mother, your parent, or whomever. Right. And instead you might say, you know what? I can't wait to tell your mother what a great day you had. And that was really nice what you did. Just switch
Right.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just easy there.
Lisa, I wonder, I'm sure we'll drill into more practical things, but something that's coming to mind is, so you've introduced the schedule for the day, you're helping these individual campers be able to chart their pathway. And the one thing I want to quickly mention is, in our last episode, we talked about the idea that all behavior is communication, right? They're communicating a need that they have. And I think it's remembering that, especially when you're working with, I think this is a broad inclusion strategy, but when you're working with people with different needs and different abilities, they're communicating their needs when there's behavior happening. So whether it's language or whether it's a camper sitting off to the side, they need something. And often the power of a visual schedule and the power of expectations is that you're helping it be clear to them in a way that works for their brain, right? To have, if they have a visual schedule with them, they remember what's coming next, so they're not feeling anxious about that. Because when kids feel anxious, they can act in certain ways to get their needs met, and that can be swearing, that can be like a breakdown, or those types of things. So these strategies are helping them not need to communicate their needs in a way that might be disruptive. So I think it's so powerful to have that framework and those practices that help them with communication.
Absolutely. And you know what, you're spot on, and I'm glad you brought that up. The behavior is communication. Some kiddos, whether it's through just developmentally or situationally, they're not able to express what's going on. They can't put their head around what it is. Maybe it is anxiety because swim's coming up and I don't want to swim, or I don't want to get in my bathing. So whatever it is, I'm hungry. I didn't sleep well last night. I didn't, so whatever that antecedent, right? Or I always say, find the why. Don't just look at a behavior and go, stop doing that behavior. What we want to do is, why is that happening? And you were pointing that out, right? So you want to look at what's going on and help to solve it, right? If you can figure out, oh, that they are hungry. So this is, them speaking up. And you do that by asking questions, trying to understand what's going on. And it could be a variety of things. It could be physiological. It could be programmatic. It could be another person. It could be the environment. It's too hot. It's too cold. I'm hungry. All of those things. An unmet need, right? I don't know what's happening. I'm new here. Why do they all know how to do this and I don't? And then, and then all of a sudden somebody, makes a comment and then they feel bad and then they start getting angry and a fight ensues. And, that kind of stuff can happen when there's an unmet need. So using all these tools can be preventative and helping somebody to not get to that point where
Right.
they're having to express that, right? That's the goal, not to get to that point. But sometimes it still happens. It's how we look at it. We don't look at it as they're bad, we want to punish them. We want to figure out, why is that happening, so I can help them, right, to have a replacement behavior. Instead of, throwing your bag on the ground or spilling the paint, what else can you do when you're, feeling upset or confused about the project, right, that we're supposed to be doing? Then you can help them solve it. And then there's success. And then you stop categorizing them as the behavior kid or the challenging kid. That's what we want to move away from.
You started to bring up, and it's a good segue into kind of talking about on camp, but you talked about aquatics, or going on the waterfront and going for a swim, or programmatically. What are some things that a counselor should be, I guess, on the lookout for when they head to the waterfront or they head to the rock climbing wall, to make sure that, depending on what the skill level of that camper is, that they're going to
Yeah.
feel included in that environment?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. Because, before I mentioned, use a visual schedule, expectation list, start of the day, right? You start every day that way. But we recognize, especially aquatics, where there's so many safety concerns and just so much, that we want to be aware of. And, knowing where our campers are and swimming, are they able to swim or not? Or we want to know what we're dealing with here, because so much safety is in play. So what I might suggest, and I do suggest this for a lot of camps, is make up a specific expectation list for swim. So that might look a little bit differently, right? So now we're going to talk about, whether it's like we're going boating and we have to, put on our life jackets, we listen to the lifeguard, we, sit on the side of the deck for instructions, whatever it is that we need to happen, and also spell out the steps, especially somebody's new. Well, when do I change my bathing? Was I supposed to put my bathing suit on or not put my bed? Like, well, when do I get my shoes? Or where's my towel? Where is that? So if you go over it all ahead of time, you're going to decrease the anxiety around that, and you're going to increase the chance for more safety in the aquatics area, whether it's a pool or a pond, right? So also, you want to think about aquatics as a space where it's a little hard to gain the group's attention, right? You're kind of like 5 more minutes, and 5 kids go under the water and they're not listening, or you have that one kiddo who's like not getting out. And sometimes they don't get out because underwater feels so good. And I read a study once that, especially for folks who have autism, that the sound and the noise, the way that it feels, can feel very soothing to them. The beating of your heart, you experience that when you go underwater. So it can feel great to be underwater. And now they're like, come on out. And you're just like, but this feels so good. So you might need to work with them a little bit more in that area. And you would do something called the transition countdown. Spell it out. Make sure you spell it out to them ahead of time. And you say, like, when I wave this, or I have 5, noodles here, and then you're gonna take one away, and then we're gonna have 4 noodles, and then 3, then 2, then 1, and then it's time to come on out, right?
So
Things like
smart.
that, fun little strategies to make sure that we're not just getting into a situation where we're now like, yelling and screaming at somebody. They like, get out of the water, get out, when they're just having this experience in the water. So yeah, just little things like that, super important. So your visual schedules, any visual tools and or actions, sometimes it's just an action, like when I wave this red flag or lift this or what have you. Explain it up front before you even get there, and not try to like explain it when you're in the middle of it, right? So explain up front. This is going to help our campers, particularly those with, more or neurodivergent or have intellectual disabilities, to know what's expected. And pool is so specific and different. Yeah.
This
So
the idea of big broad visual like cues, I think, is so smart. And I just had not, like, for the programmers out there that are listening to this, you can do this in every program area, right? Like at the waterfront, I was thinking like you could hang the buoys up on a big string and you could move the buoys along as the schedule is going. Or at the rock wall, it could be some like carabiners along a piece of rope, or any program area can get that integrated. It's so easy. Arts and crafts, you stick up a star every 15
yeah.
minutes, or you take one down. Like, everyone should be doing that after
Yeah,
listening to
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I forgot our visuals, and we're way out in the field, and we're doing like, looking for bugs and whatnot. Well, you take 5 sticks, but you have to get them involved, and that's where a kiddo might struggle. You get them involved. Can you and Jeffrey get together and collect 5 sticks for me? Okay, and then so they're involved. All right, and you're going to do the first one, and you're going to do second, right? So now you're giving roles to people to help out. So now they're learning, like, oh, when it goes from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. Now I know it's time to pack up. So you're not just saying, come on, everybody, let's go, when somebody wanted to catch one more of the caterpillars or whatever, right? So you really want to give control to them to figure out, to help them regulate, manage their own time. That's a really key, because sometimes we have this whole group, we got a ton of kids, we got to move from here to here, and then these campers got to go from here to here. And using transition, visual and verbal, right? You have to say it out loud, and you have to show it in some way that can be, just look around, what's around you, right?
Yeah.
Here, I got 5 sticky notes. I'm going to put 5 sticky notes out, like just what's around you. Have
Amazing.
them get involved. Easy tips, like those little things, can help kids who need that assistance in knowing what's happening, why it's happening, and what's expected of me.
I love that it's universal communication as well, right? So whether you are working with a camper in the group who has needs, or you are working with kids who don't really need that, they have their own clock going, on any given day. Even somebody who operates pretty regularly still might need a cue to go, like, oh no, I got distracted during craft day because I got so focused on something
Or,
that I thought was
yeah,
really cool. So it was
yeah.
really nice to have that, right? So even if you are a camp that is, we have one child, or only a handful of children, this is still universally something that you can put in place in all these areas that
Yeah.
would help your efficiency, just your overall operations at the camp as well. So
Yeah, your job easier, right? Like, as a camp counselor, I'm guaranteeing you this is going to make your job easier, right? So that's a key. And universal design, yes, we use them for all. And you know what? Part of the making inclusion work, peers. right? Peers, and I'm not saying kids without disabilities help the kids with disabilities. As a group now, when we see the 5, the 4, the 3, now we're kind of like, oh, it's time to, so we're helping each other. And maybe you notice that your friend who gets really into this piece of artwork is like, needs to get on board. Oh, come on, Joe, we've got to put stuff away, right? So they can help each other out. And it doesn't mean kids without disabilities help kids with disabilities. It means the group helps the group to move. So that's an important thing that can happen when you have visuals and auditory. Then you're kind of seeing and keeping people in check, like when everybody's reading off what are our expectations or what's on the schedule next, we all have accountability to that. We all know that after art, we have to get ready for, and as a group, we have to get out of the art room because another group's coming in and we're going to head to lunch, right? So yeah, really important. Back to the for all, that they work for all.
I think another area that might be useful for counselors to have some skill sets in is I think about meal times a lot, but also like the large gatherings on camp where you get everyone together. It can be loud, there can be a lot of fast happening things. How do you work with a camper who may feel overwhelmed in those situations as a counselor so that they can either A, feel comfortable, or B, even start participating, all these types of things.
Yeah.
Those kind of big, I guess, all camp activities is kind of where I'm going with this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we can look at places like dining halls or, whatever the large group activity, a lot of cheering, a lot of clapping, whatnot. If we can just identify before we go into spaces, and this is what you can do before camp, look at spaces. And if it is incredibly loud in a space, can we look and kind of navigate, divide out a little quieter space, maybe the way that the roof is or whatever can make it a little less overwhelming. We know that up front that when we go into the dining hall, for anybody who would appreciate it being a little bit quieter over in the purple area, might be better for you. You're still part of the group and other kids could be there. Another thing we want to do is help kids themselves to manage this by giving cues. So we might say, hey, we're going into for lunch now, and it could get a little loud in there. So if anybody, would prefer to wear their headphones, or, you can put them on now, when now would be a good time, or giving a personal cue to somebody who that they would benefit from putting on those headphones so that they're noise canceling. That might be helpful. Or, if it gets a little too loud in there and it gets a little hectic, don't forget we have the sensory kit here and we have a quiet spot over here. So when you tell them that up front, it's going to allow them to make the decision to self-regulate. It's getting too loud. It's getting too loud. What can I do? Oh, okay. Oh, my counselor said I can go over here and ask for the sensory kit. That might be helpful for me. So being preventative really helps. And just looking and just knowing, like, to do it. Yes, we do in camp have to, like, cheer and clap and loud. But as a whole, if we knew we had like 10 kids that just get really just super affected by this, could we dial it down a little bit and still have fun? Could we do like a quiet clapping, snap, 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 snap? I don't know. We look at how do you make the space work for everybody more efficiently, without taking away, we want to make it fun for everybody, but does it always have to be a certain way? Could we look at it a different way? Right?
Yeah,
So,
I think it's important. Like, I've been to some camps. I remember I did a tour of a camp and I walked into the gym and it was like it was a nightclub. The music was so loud and I was overstimulated,
yeah.
right? And I think it's just like, I think sometimes we feel like we need music to make things better, but you're just adding another stimulus that can
Yeah.
like take away from
Yeah.
the camper experience. And like,
Yeah.
we're at
Yeah.
camp. We don't need the club blasting music to have a good time.
Absolutely. You bring up a good point that, again, if we just go back statistically, say you have 20 counselors, there's a good chance that a good handful, maybe 4 or 5, are going to experience the same thing that a lot of the campers do. So, can we kind of arrange things so that we can have a quieter space, like a quieter dining area? Does that make sense? And that the councils that would appreciate that might want to be in there too, because they get overwhelmed. Because it's not just something that like stops at the age of 11. I mean, this follows a lot of people in life and they can be overstimulated as well. I can, like, yeah, that if you can't hear, that's not good. So we can look at the overall. Can we put this down? We don't, yeah, like we don't have to be a nightclub here. So
And
yeah.
and what I love these days that people are starting to like own their neurodivergence too. And one of the best staff members, I shouldn't say favorite, but she was my favorite. She was awesome. One of my favorite staff members that I got to work with, she carried around a set of like noise dampening headphones with her on her backpack, and she used them for herself. And then I watched people start to grab those and have them with them,
Navigating
and
towards her.
like,
Yeah.
or those like loop headphone things that people put in their
Yep.
ears. But what I loved about it was that counselor, one day I saw her walking around with 4 of those headphones, and then I saw come across my desk like a budget request to get a bunch more of those things. And she's like, it's shocking how many kids like
Yes.
are just starting to use these and benefit from them. And then we're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe the spaces are too loud, maybe it's the space that's the problem. So we
That's
really,
it.
I,
That's
I think
it.
if people choose to use those headphones, like, then they're choosing to make the space better for them. But it
Them.
also makes you like, I
Oh,
think as a camp director listening, you're
yep.
like, oh, okay, do we need to have it this loud to be
Yeah.
successful? So I think
Right.
offering those
Right.
choices is powerful as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, part of inclusion is you're okay with making accommodations, modifications in a setting, right? So that would be, and you want to normalize that process. So that person walking around with them cues this new kid who, like, I also have that at home. And it's okay for me to wear those here, right? That gives a nice cue. It normalizes the process of needing that accommodation. But the next level of what stronger inclusion is looking at systems. Do we need to have it this loud? Can we look at how things are? Like, why do we have it this loud? What are we looking to gain? Okay, we want camaraderie, right? Can we do it by pushing the volume down a little bit? Can we still achieve that? So now you're making the space work for everybody, and we don't need to pull out the headphones. That's the most ideal, because that's when you make spaces more equitable for everybody, right? And rather than, well, you can use an accommodation, and that's good if we can do accommodations, but better yet, does the system need to change? And if we can make that change, that's the bigger win, because it's going to work for more people without having people stand out like they're the ones with the headphones, they're the ones without, right? That just make it not so loud, because most people would agree it's too loud.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times with those grander changers of like what your dining hall looks like or what those all camps look like, that's coming from that higher leadership director kind of role, and you as a counselor get to help either A, insist on those changes because of experiences you're having with your campers, or helping your campers with those type of cultural things. But I think also as a counselor, you have a lot of that control of those systems in your cabin. You know, your camp director, while they have some say of what's going on in the cabins for, what they're looking for, when you guys wake up in the morning and when your campers get back there at the end of the night, right, you are really the controller of that culture. So I guess kind of our last little space to hit is, what are some inclusive practices that a counselor might be able to do when they're running their cabin? They have this space that is just for them and their campers to make them feel like they belong.
Yeah, and Oliver, that is a great point. You have the space that you can make it work more for everybody, but you also have a voice, right? And I think that, when we think about, the directors versus the boots on the ground counselors, if the counselors are the eyes and ears of what's happening in your community. So I would say, if you're comfortable, look at spaces and policies and procedures. And if there are changes that could make it better for all, be okay with going to your director. Most directors would welcome that, because they may not be the right there in it and notice that it is too loud or this or that, right? So there's that. But now going back to your space, how do you make it work for everybody? And the way you want to think, that there are universal design principles, and I'll send you those 7 too. And it's the things you want to think about when you make a space and make it work for everybody. Usability, right? Even people having a voice to what will work here, asking the group what's going to work here for this group, right? How do we want our space to be utilized? So really thinking about making it work for everybody, right? Thinking about, noise, light, sound, all that kind of stuff, that could make somebody's experience better or worse. How do we give people quieter spaces versus, common spaces? How do we share spaces? Where are the directions? Where are the, right, the expectations, things like that. So you have full control over how you do that. And I want you, to be that first class counselor, you have to be looking at your own spaces and be willing to make these changes, but then also look at the overall camp and make a suggestion or notice something that could be done. Ask, why is it done this way? Right? Because here's the basic thing. Most camps, right, we go back historically, they were built by and for people without disabilities, right? People who are neurotypical. They were not built for people who are neurodivergent or who have disabilities. So we need to constantly disrupt and look and change and make suggestions. So be that first class counselor and do that. Look around what can be changed here and make that suggestion.
Well, Matt, do you have anything else that you'd want to ask about like places or spaces?
Do I have anything? Yeah, I've got a lot of things. Lisa, I think we need to have you back if you would grace us with your presence again. Because I think there's a million things that we could talk about to follow this up on. But I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for sharing this and for all the work that you do to help create spaces of belonging. And I know that the people listening to this episode, you're gonna make camps even that little bit more belonging this summer just from the knowledge that you shared here. So thank you, Lisa.
Appreciate the platform and being able to raise up this important conversation. And I would love to come back and I would love to focus on belonging and friendship, right? Like let's get into specifics. How do you help create that space? Now that we're,
Yes.
making everything work for everybody, but how do you move from somebody being invited to somebody making a friend? And I have 8
Totally.
steps to do there. We can talk all about that. I love that topic.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Matt's like, yes, we'll schedule it after we're done. But we always wrap our shows with something called our Eggle time. So it's ever growing, ever learning is what it stands for. It's a trick or a tip, a game or a song for counselors to use to be better every single day. So Matt and I kind of have been giving out a lot of these throughout the years. So hopefully we'll get a good one from you as well today. I'll kind of start off as an example, but I'm a huge proponent that, a lot of us have gone to school for a really long time and we get equipped with skill sets at school, like taking notes and repeating things back and practicing things so that we can do a proper presentation. And I think a lot of the times when we get older we start going like, oh, I don't need to take notes, I'm just gonna remember it. Or even AI today will just take my notes for me, it's not a big deal. And all of a sudden we're not putting those things into our brain. So I always like to remind counselors, like, do practical study tips that you learned while you were going through school. You wired your brain to use those techniques. Why are you not using them? So my little trick for you guys is don't forget about flashcards. Like, I have some flashcards over here that I was using for my own self so that I can practice my memory. I am trying to learn Italian. I am not good. Do not ask me to try and say anything. But like these things are already ingrained in our brain that we use as skill sets. And I just want to remind staff, like, grab some flashcards, right? If you're trying to remember some words, if you're trying to remember some concepts, you're just trying to get your memory going. We have all these things that we have in our brains. I just want to remind you guys, hey, take notes when you're doing things. Like, even while we were talking today, I'm like, okay, cool. I have a little notepad off to the side. I'm just kind of trying to put some things down on paper so I don't forget something for the future. So I think flashcards is my one of the day because there's a social interaction if you're doing it with somebody else, especially during staff training. But then also, like, if you're just on your own, you can have them in a back pocket, pull them out, and start going over your words or whatever you're trying to remember. So simple, easy.
Love that.
Yeah, Matt, what's your Eggle for today?
My angle is something very simple and very cost effective, and I'm sure you can find it in lots of different places. It's to have a little baggie of Lego or Duplo on you as a camp counselor. And I love having Lego because it's a nice little pretty quiet fidget toy that you can use while you're trying to pay attention, just like popping a couple bricks together. I'm not talking, you're not like building a castle while you're trying to pay attention to something, but you're just fiddling with it. Like, I have a little Lego on my desk here that kind of sits with me, and I'll plug in the little person and unplug it as I'm talking to somebody. But there's also some really great programming stuff you can do with Lego. You can debrief a program and give everyone a couple pieces of Lego, and you can say, okay, we did this thing together. Let's build the memory of our experience. And everyone shares one thing that they accomplished or one thing that they loved about that, and then you build this nice little tower, and you can carry that tower around with you to say, like, hey, remember when we did this awesome thing? Let's keep doing these awesome things. There's like, I could give you 100 games that you could play with a little baggie of Lego. So just grab a little bit. You could go to like a thrift store, and I'm sure you can find a little bit, or Duplo, the bigger blocks, if that's a little more accessible for some people to be playing with. That's great too. So grab some Lego.
Absolutely. And studies show that, sometimes when you see somebody at a meeting and they're using a fidget device, and it might be like, how are they paying attention? But actually, studies show that it helps them to pay attention more. For somebody who's neurodivergent, has ADHD, right, for instance, that having that capacity to do that helps them to be able to listen better and absorb information better. So I think that's a cool one. And I love the idea of, taking notes. I was listening to a podcast yesterday and there were so many good things. And I was making breakfast and I kept writing them on pieces of like, oh, I like that quote. I like that. And I had all these notes. And this morning I was like, oh, there's that one. Darn it. Right. I was like going around collecting all my notes because it was too good of a nugget. And I thought, oh, I'll remember that. I'm not going to remember that. Like in 10 seconds, I'm not going to remember that. So I would
Yeah.
love both those suggestions. Yeah. And I have one that it's kind of fun. So, and it can be done right now and in camp. And I'm going to suggest to all our counselors listening here, watch movies or read books that have a disability inclusion topic and or characters, particularly characters with disabilities, but also be mindful. We always like to say that representation matters, and I'm going to suggest a couple that actually have people with disabilities who are portraying. So not, they haven't hired a person to act like they're disabled, like actually hired disabled actors because they're very good, and they have the lived experience. But anyway, I'm going to give you three movies. Now, maybe we're not in camp yet and you're listening to this, and put it on your watch list and watch it this weekend. Think about it. Talk to people about it. Recommend it to somebody, right? So the first one it's a TV show, Atypical. I thought it was very well done. So that was good. Peanut Butter
So
Falcon
good.
is the best movie. I think it's really good. There's a lot of good, sometimes when these types of movies come out, I sit down and I'm like ready to like cringe or be like, oh God, are they going to do that inspiration porn thing? Are they going to really like portray people or not use proper terminology or higher level thinking of how people should belong and not be patronized, right? This one was done marvelously. And the last one, it's actually a Disney movie. It's called Out of My Mind. And it was fabulous, about a young girl in school who has cerebral palsy and her fight to just be seen as somebody to has something to say, right? And it was important that, and my takeaway on that is always presume competence, right? You don't look at somebody and because of the way they are or look or, present, that you think that they're not capable. We always want to presume competence. So those are my three. Now watch them yourself, and or, I've been to camps and I know sometimes there's movie nights, right? Or it's going to rain and they're going to pop in a movie. Consider popping in something that has a disability theme and then discuss it afterwards. Hey, what did you think? Come up with some core questions and get some conversations, because, part about inclusion is being comfortable just having conversations. What do you think it was like for her when the teacher disregarded that she knew the answer just because she, couldn't raise her hand? She did it on a communication. What do you think she felt, right? Those are great, kind of character building and empathy building, understanding other people's experience. So those are my three. And, certainly just look up any other books that, would have a disability inclusion theme.
A former football player, so I always love watching any type of film, but then the breaking down, because that's what we do in football as a sport, is you watch the play, you break it down,
Yeah.
you overanalyze it. So my friends are not exactly big fans always of watching movies with me because they're like, "Oh man, what did you take from that scene?" It's like, the movie's still on, Oliver. Like, you just let it play through. We can talk about it at the end, and then
Love you.
after the
Well,
movie, I want to talk
yeah.
for hours about what we saw. But I think it's so great to have that visual in front of people, and also in movies to get that representation so that it is shown to everybody who can watch. So thank you so much for coming on to the show today and being able to share with us and give everybody kind of the stepping stone to start to think about how their role as a counselor in inclusivity will play a part for them this summer and for their future summers, but also like just in life, right? About when they encounter that need to help somebody else have that feeling of belonging. So for our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, would be so grateful if you left us a review wherever you were listening to the podcast. Your ratings and reviews not only help us know what you like or didn't like about our show, but it helps boost our rankings and helps more people discover the show.
And for those of you who want to get in touch with Lisa to find out more about the great work that Lisa is doing, we'll make sure there's links on there on the show notes to get in touch. But Lisa, is there anything you wanted to share quickly about Merge Consulting and the work that you do that might support camp?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just invite everybody to reach out and connect, and I'll share my link tree is probably the best thing to go to because you're going to catch articles I've written even for ACA Camping Magazine, podcasts like this that I've been on, what's coming up, and do know that if you are wanting to enhance your disability inclusion initiative at your camp, reach out and we can talk about what that might look like and how I can support you. You know, I do in-person trainings, webinars, I do assessments of camps too. I come in and look at the whole systems, right? Usually best to be done not in the middle of camp, but partially, but ahead of time. What's your whole process look like and how can we improve your capacity to welcome, engage, and support your campers with diverse abilities? So I would love to hear from you. Yeah. How can I help?
Awesome. So please go to the show notes at gocamp.pro/FCC, and you'll see all of the resources, all the links to the many things we talked about, and you'll find all the other Go Camp Pro podcasts there as well.
Thanks for listening, friends. And remember, camp is camp and camp is all good.
First Class Counselors is brought to you by Beth and Travis Allison, Summer Camp Leadership Training and Marketing Consultants. Thanks for listening, friends.
Hey Camp Pros, we love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, we hope that whenever you share an idea that you learned from the Camp Hacker podcast, conference, summer camp professionals group, or wherever else, that you're quick to give credit where credit is due. That way, we can all encourage more camp pros to share the tips and tricks that will make camp better.